Welcome to Tech Tales with Ben Tchoubineh. This is your front row seat to the stories behind today's most innovative tech leaders. Each episode dives deep into the journeys, challenges, and victories of those shaping the future of technology. From startup struggles to breakthrough moments in seasoned leaders' lives, grab a cup of coffee and join us as we uncover the human side of tech, one story at a time.
Oh my God, we're here. It's crazy. We've been trying to do this for how long, Jim?
Only
6 months or so with you. And then I've been thinking about starting a podcast for I don't know how long. Well, it's been years in the making. I think I was probably thinking about starting a podcast before the word podcast was a thing. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And I'm finally here. So, okay, episode 1. Let's hope this one makes it. We already recorded one episode and it didn't make it. So let's hope this one does. I'm going to try to minimize the ums and the you-knows and the likes, but it's my first. So, let's see if I can actually, do it. In any case, here we go. Welcome to Tech Tales with Ben Tchoubineh. We're going to talk to luminaries in technology and wonder how they got to where they are and think about where they're going to be going, and also learn a lot about what's happening in their lives today, and hopefully also a lot of valuable information. So here we go. Jim is one of my best friends, honestly, and we're brothers in arms. I think the two of us share the same 15 minutes of fame, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
That's probably how we, that's why we're such good friends, right? When you get in the trenches and share the same experiences. I mean, so we, we were, there's the first, I think it's the first one, maybe. We'll see how this goes. We were both founding members of the CMMC accreditation body, which became the Cyber AB now. So CMMC is what brought us together. I want to start with you tell me how you learned of this thing and how you got involved in this crazy voyage of CMMC.
So I've been doing IT and cyber for a long time. I was actually hired to be the chief technology officer of a company back in 2016. And I was the CTO and the general counsel. And the owner of the company had this idea of taking a really cool piece of technology and turning it into a cyber product, which was fine. But it had been around, it had been bought by DoD and other entities for like over a decade. So we're trying to figure out what else can we do? How can we make this into but a different product so that it was, a true cyber product. And I started doing a lot of research. I used to be a systems administrator for Congress. I've done all sorts of weird things in my career. So back in the day, I knew that when I stopped being a systems administrator in 1999, the problems I had was I didn't have good ways of doing patch management. I was really worried about insider threats. I had to make sure that I was, maintaining my systems properly, making sure that I got my employees out of my system when people were left the organization, get them out so that their accounts weren't stagnant and all that kind of stuff. And so here it was, 17 years later, and I'm being asked to jump back in. So I said to the boss, okay, so this is where things were when I stopped. Where are we today? Because I'm sure things have changed a lot. And he's like, no, we're still, we don't do patch management well. We don't do all these other things well. And I'm like, wow, how can we in almost 20 years, which is 10 lifetimes when it comes to software, right? How are we not doing this better? And so I took a couple steps back and said, okay, what are we missing? And I looked at issues like Equifax and some of the other things that were at that time very timely breaches and tried to understand what was it that was the systemic cause of this. Because if you look at Equifax, if you look at some of the other big breaches of the time, they were with companies that have actually been spending good money on IT and cyber. They had decent cyber tools in place. So what was it? And when you read the congressional report, what Congress says is Equifax failed in two places. Number one, their management generally didn't really talk about cybersecurity. They tried to remember to talk about cyber at their quarterly board meetings, but that was about it. So it got filtered through a bunch of layers. So that's one very big problem and a key indicator that there were issues. But the other one, the technical issue was they had an SSL sniffer, the secure sockets layer sniffer, that let them see what was going on, all the traffic that was going, to be able to look for malicious activity. Well, somebody forgot to update that SSL certificate on that sniffer, and it sat in that expired state for 6 months. So none of their monitoring tools could see any of the traffic. As soon as somebody finally got around to updating that SSL sniffer, all the alarms started going off. That's how they caught the bad guys, was because they finally had the visibility. So stupid things like not updating or not patching or not, how do we fix that problem? That
Right.
for
So
me,
you use the right tools, but you're not maintaining them. You're not using them effectively.
and you're not
If you
taking
put a
action
firewall
on
in
it.
your network, but you don't set it up correctly, it doesn't really matter.
Exactly. And so what do we do? How do we solve that fundamental problem was what I saw. And so the company that I was working for at the time had an IT asset management tool. It was really good at identifying all the unpatched devices and all of that kind of stuff. So, okay, what we really need is a reporting program, single pane of glass type of thing, and let us see what's going on across all these systems. Great, we can do that. And it was right around that same time that I stumbled onto the NIST cybersecurity framework. It had been out for a couple of years. And I'm like, oh, that's a nice structured way to approach putting together this program. I could use that at the top end. And then I was looking for other technical approaches. So for me, it was a function of governance, right? I need a top down, but I also need a bottom up way of looking at this stuff. So what other controls are there? And I hit the CIS controls because in 2016, 800.171 was still really new. So I had found the CIS controls. I started looking at those. And then all of a sudden, people in our company started getting phone calls about the DFARS and the DFARS requirement, which if you're in the government space, the DFARS is a massive document. Like everybody's going, well, the DFARS requirements. And I said, I don't know what section of the DFARS we're talking about. Could you give me pointers? And nobody could. So
Which
finally,
is the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation
supplement.
Right? Because the FAR is the Federal Acquisition Regulation. This is the defense.
Right. So when the government buys stuff, they want to make sure that they're buying things consistently from one company to another, so we don't give preferential treatment to anybody or any of that kind of stuff. So they've defined this thing called the Federal Acquisition Regulations. They are the basic ground rules for how you conduct business. And then every agency gets to write its own supplement for that and customize things to their needs. And so DoD has their DFARS. And so when it came to cybersecurity and protecting DoD's information, they created this new clause in 2016 that says this is what contractors need to do. About a year and a half later, I transitioned to a new role. And it was right around that time when Katie Arrington did her mic drop. And I started hearing about CMMC beforehand. And that it was...
Let's stop there.
Yeah.
Yeah, because a couple of things come to mind here. One is DFARS, basically the rules of being a contractor with the DoD, the rules by which the DoD purchases goods and services. So they put a rule in that says, basically, you got to be secure, right, at the most basic, but based on the NIST 800.171, right? That was the DFARS rule that they put in. The problem, of course, being that there was no way to enforce it.
Yeah.
Right?
In the past, they tried to do this earlier with a different standard called 853, and they imposed certain requirements from 853, which was another national standard that applied to the government, and it got really confusing. At about the same time, there were efforts inside of the government to standardize a lot of the approach to handling unclassified information, what's called controlled unclassified information. And
right. So, I'm going to stop you again because there's a lot here. You are, in my view, in my book, I know a lot about CMMC, I should say, one of the founders. You're one of the foremost authorities on controlled unclassified information, right?
Sure.
So how do you say it? Do you say CUI or CUI? It's like a big question.
I don't call it CUI except for one scenario where I help run a conference called CUICon. And so in that scenario, I do call it CUI. Pretty much any other time, it's CUI for me.
Okay. All right. So we'll call it CUI here.
Yeah, you can call it what you want. It doesn't matter. Potato, it's fine.
Yeah. Well, we'll say CUI since that's your rule. And so this is all about protecting CUI, the information that is worth protecting. Let's put it that way. That's not classified. Okay, so you've got the CUI, and you're putting all this together. You want to get involved, and now based on this DFAR's rule that is not necessarily being enforced, we get to the mic drop moment, right? We get to the amazing Katie Arrington, whom both of us know well, and she's a really good friend. And I'm so happy that she's now the CIO of the Department of Defense. It's really amazing. Kudos to you, Katie. Hopefully you're watching this. The mic drop moment, right? It's a big moment, and it's been mentioned many times, is the moment when Katie Arrington was standing in front of a room full of contractors and virtual people virtually connected. And you were one of those people, right? You were virtually connected, and you were watching virtually, and says, there's this new CMMC thing. You guys have to figure out how to enforce it, how to put it together, right? What did she say? Because
we had just a little bit of backstory to that too, and then we'll come back to where we were. But so 2016, there's this new CUI thing that comes out, and all the federal agencies are supposed to adopt it. DoD leans forward, and it's actually really impressive because DoD is the largest federal agency, right? They have more personnel, more everything. They have more sensitive information than anybody else, and they actually lean in when most of the other civilian agencies say, we're not going to participate in this. DoD actually leans forward and says, yeah, we hear you, President. We hear you, Congress. This is what you want us to do. So fine, we'll do it. They stub their toes in a lot of places. But I give them a lot of credit for at least leaning forward and trying. So they incorporate into the DFARS this requirement that says, hey, contractors, you need to meet the requirements in 800-171. That was 2016. There are surveys done of contractors by NDIA, the Cerebrain, which is a big certifying body, and DoD does its own internal surveys, and they all show that less than half of defense contractors had even read the requirements, not implemented them, just read them to know that they exist. So there's there's this fundamental problem. And so when the new administration comes in at that time, the Trump administration comes in, they look at this problem that's been on the books now for a couple of years, and they're like, okay, this is not working, because what we saw was all of our really cool technology was walking off. Our adversaries like China, Russia, et cetera, were getting access to things and like down to the rivet hole, down to the color of certain things. They knew exactly how to make things. In fact, one of our friends, Matt Titcomb, said he recently got a client of his who was literally shipped a part that the government had sent them the information. They wanted them to design it and build it. Somebody actually in China got it, made the part, and shipped it to the company that won the contract and said, hey, we can subcontract this out for you, and here's what it's going to cost for every piece. Wow. So we know we have holes. We know we have these gaping holes in our security systems. And so DoD says, okay, we've got to stop this. This is hurting our warfighters. This is hurting the nation. Bigger picture, there's other implications too, because people's sensitive information is involved. Think about if you're the victim of identity fraud, what the impact is. And now imagine that you're on the front lines, you're fighting some battle, and you're worried in the back of your mind that your spouse is maybe having issues with somebody, stealing your identity. That's just not the kind of thing that we want our warfighters to have to deal with. So DoD, again, leans forward, says, okay, we get it. We need to do this. We need to protect this. And so in 2019, Katie does her mic drop moment and says, look, we're done. We've asked you to please do this. Nobody's listening. We need to begin enforcing this more. So industry, you need to step up and figure out what that looks like. We need to create an accreditation body. We need a certification that says, yes, you are actually meeting these requirements. And DoD knows that we don't have the personnel. We can't hire the personnel to do this effectively, efficiently, at scale, all that good stuff. So please, industry, go figure this out. And like you said, I was sitting on that call when she did that. And honestly, she almost literally dropped the mic. She gently put it down, but she literally said, industry, it's up to you, and then walked away. And there was like stunned silence for a good 10 or 15 seconds as everybody was like, is there somebody else coming up? What are we supposed to do? Nothing happened. So a group of us got together And everybody raised their hand. They wanted to help create the governance structure for this entity. And I kind of took a step back because I had helped create startup companies before. I was like, well, maybe somebody should help with the budget and figure out how to make this thing real. And I had done business plans for companies in the past and all that kind of stuff. So I thought, well, I can at least volunteer to do that. It'd be a wonderful way for me to contribute to this effort. I'm an intellectual property lawyer. The idea of watching intellectual property walk off to our adversaries really rubs me the wrong way. So this is kind of my way of trying to give back. I didn't serve the nation. So this is my way of trying to do something to help. And so I volunteered to help create it. I wound up doing all the budget work up front, and before it was even a thing, got to work with everybody else, because when you're trying to figure out how much is this going to cost, what do we need to run as an organization, you kind of need to know everything about the organization. So I worked with you on training. I worked with other folks in their different areas as well, trying to understand what the plan was so that we could figure out how to go to market and how to, how do you fund a nonprofit, which was a very interesting problem.
Yeah. And, how does one end up all of a sudden on a board of directors, of this accreditation body that everyone is kind of looking to? It was just so random, right? And in response to Katie's call to serve, right? I had no idea what was happening. I wasn't even in the room. I'm not usually a plugged in person, honestly. Those who know me know I'm just busy doing work. That's all I do, just kind of trying to build things, but I'm not really connected usually. Trying here with this podcast. Anyway, so my wife comes to me and she's like, there's this new thing called CMMC. You need to get involved. And I listen to her a lot. I've been told I should just listen. I'll be happier that way. So I did. And that's when I got involved and I realized this thing was coming together. And I got on a call, and I think it was like thousands of people on this call. And back then it was like a conference call, right? This was pre-COVID, so nobody got on camera. And I learned about the training plans of this new budding organization. And I just basically sent in an email with my thoughts about how the training should work, which now to this day, Keiko, which is the training organization and the testing certification organization that manages all of the assessment training, runs pretty much the way that I thought it should. And there's been amazing improvements, of course, don't get me wrong. But I just sent in an email with my ideas, with my thoughts, just based on my experience in training and certification. And next thing you know, I'm on this board. It's crazy. It's a crazy, crazy adventure. And all of a sudden, we have this amazing responsibility to secure the DIB contractors, or at least help certify them as secure. So, so of course, we went through and fast forward 5.5 years. I mean, honestly, did you think that it would take this long for CMMC to actually become the law of the land and be implemented?
No, and it really should. But yeah, I knew it was going to take a while because there's training, there's other things that have to happen, and like all of that I understood. And actually in 2021, 22, we were ready to go live. Like the AB had done, the accreditation body had done everything it needed to do to begin rolling this stuff out. And then a pause was put on everything, and that really put a kink in the rollout. But we were ready to go. I mean, we were ready to start assessing. We had assessors ready. We had all the infrastructure that we thought we needed. Of course, you're building the plane as you fly it. You're learning from a lot of lessons along the way. But we were at least as ready as we could be at that time to go forward. So it was very disappointing to see that it got put on hold. Now, as a practical matter, watching the way the legal system has played out over the last couple of years and other things, I think it was a wise thing in the end, because DoD was originally putting CMMC out as a series of policies, internal policies, which was more efficient, right? It's the fast way to get this stuff done, which is fine. But had they done this that way, it probably would not have held up under some of the more recent legal decisions. There's one called Loper Bright, where the courts basically got rid of this thing called Chevron deference, which meant that the courts would let the agencies do whatever they wanted unless it was really running afoul of something. The agencies could come up with really clever interpretations of laws and basically used that as a justification, and that was good enough. And now the courts have said, no, you need like express delegation of authority, either from the president or from Congress, to do some of this stuff. And if you don't have that, you're probably not going to withstand scrutiny. So CMMC, and again, to DoD's credit, while it was frustrating to see it put on hold, it was probably the right thing to do at the end of the day.
Yeah, because it could survive all kinds of liability issues. And you're a lawyer by training. We'll kind of get back to the legal aspects of this CMMC thing, and I really want to focus on that actually on this call. But before we get to, I want our audience to get to know you a little bit more as well. Why law? Why did you pick? Where'd you grow up? By the way, first of all, just where'd you grow up?
I grew up in South, so right over the bridge from Philadelphia, basically.
Okay, so Pennsylvania kid.
Yes.
Cool. And why law?
I actually didn't want to go into law. When I was undergrad, my undergrad is computer engineering. I wanted to be an engineer, and I was for a number of years. So I designed test equipment for satellites. I've written code for Navy contracts. I've done all sorts of weird things. But my last technical job was with the United States Congress. I was a systems administrator for an office of, it's one of the few truly nonpartisan offices on the Hill. I was a systems administrator for what's called the House Office of the Legislative Counsel. Their job was to help Congress write laws. And back in the 90s, when I was there, they handled about 85% of the legislation that went before Congress. That all came through my office. And so it was my job to keep everything secure. I was worried about insider threats. I wasn't as worried. My big thing was I didn't want a draft of some piece of legislation to show up the next morning in the Washington Post and have it found out that it came from my office. Right? It's one thing if a congressperson wants to leak it, that's on them, and that's fine. But it could not come from somebody stealing stuff from my office. At the same time, I was working with about 35 attorneys at that time, and on Capitol Hill, you kind of know each other's politics, right? You know where you stand politically. But everybody in our office, everybody got along really well, despite what you see playing out in the rest of the world right now. Everybody knew, we had people across the political spectrum, and everybody played nicely together. More importantly, I watched people who were staunch Democrats walk into meetings with Republicans, and I wasn't in the meeting, but I would then, because I would running around dealing with stuff, I would see that at the end of the meeting, and I knew the players because I knew some of the people that were walking into the meeting with my colleagues, and I could tell they were Republicans and Democrats, right? But they would walk out, and the Republicans would all have smiles on their faces, and they would say what a wonderful job the attorney had done in helping to coach them to craft the legislation the way they wanted it. And then I would literally watch that same person walk into the room down the hall with people on the opposite side of the same issue, and the same result would play out. It didn't matter whether the attorney was Democrat, Republican. They were giving the best advice they could. They were giving the most professional advice they could. And that really resonated with me because that was so very different from what you see of attorneys on TV, right? And it really just gave me a different perspective on what being an attorney was like. And I got to a point where my office ran perfectly. When I got there, the office's computers restarted every day at 4:00. And we had all sorts of other problems, and I fixed everything. I re-architected their network. I did all sorts of stuff. And after about a year, everything just kind of ran. And I went from doing the fun stuff of having to re-architect everything to doing desktop tech support where somebody forgot their password or something like that. So, I very quickly got bored with the job.
I was going to say, you got bored, right? Knowing you.
Yeah.
You want challenges in your life.
Exactly. I want something else to do. So I started looking at what was next for me. And I was a person of one. I was a group of one taking care of this office. So other than them hiring some staff, which I didn't need because everything ran fine with just me there, I didn't know what else I would do. There was nowhere else for my career to go other than just hanging out there. There were lots of advantages to being in that office. It was a nice place to work and some nice people, but I wanted to do something more. So I started thinking about law school. Started asking some of the lawyers that I worked with, what would that look like? How hard would it be? And then I applied. I set a minimum bar for myself for the bar exam. I bought a book called 30 Days to the LSAT. And then a week before the LSAT, I actually sat down and looked at the 30 Days to the LSAT. set a minimum bar for what I wanted for my score. And I said, if I don't score at least this high, then I'm just not going to go. It's not worth it. And of course, I scored above the score that I had set for myself. Not by much, but I said, enough that, okay, then that's probably a sign that I should go to law school. So I did.
Amazing. So you have, engineering technical experience, congressional experience, and of course, you're a lawyer at this point. What a perfect combination, right, for what ended up happening, and you being one of the foremost people who came up with this new way of securing our nation. So, let's fast forward to now. What are you doing now? You're involved in multiple organizations. So let's do a plug. What are you involved in? You are involved in an assessment today, I think. So tell me what your companies, what your organizations are.
So we're basically 5 different things. Because I can't sit still. When I stepped down from the cyber AB after a year, so I volunteered with the AB for a year. It was unpaid, which was very painful economically. So I finally had to step down and say, okay, I'm done for now. So got through all of that. I started a nonprofit to give away, because when I stepped down, there was so much misinformation out there about CMMC. I wanted to make sure that there was what I hoped would be a trusted voice in the ecosystem who was saying, look, this is the way to interpret these different issues, or here's some fundamental training, or whatever it was. So I started the nonprofit, and we give away all sorts of things. That's called the CMMC Information Institute. I also started a company called Fathom Cyber. That was actually in existence before I joined the board. Fathom Cyber is a cyber consulting company. We help companies get ready for CMMC. Back when it first started, we were doing the NIST CIS the NIST CSF and the CIS controls, right? But it's the same basic ideas. I'm now the co-owner of a C3PAO as well. So that one's called Peak InfoSec. So we actually do the CMMC certifications. I'm also part of a company a group that's starting a what's called a captive insurance company. So once you have your CMMC certifications, we can help you get better insurance, either better quality insurance or lower cost insurance, or there's a bunch of different permutations. The big thing is that you get to participate as sort of a co-owner in that captive. You help set the path that captive will follow. And so there's some real advantages to being part of a captive insurance company. One of the core requirements to be part of the captive is that you have to have a CMMC certification first. So because there's a whole lot of maturity that comes along with it. There's a whole lot of other benefits. So it's just kind of a smart thing for us to do. And then the last thing that I do is that I teach. And so I teach for organizations like Phoenix TS, and I teach for the Rochester Institute of Technology. Our IT's program, we were able to get a grant from the NSA, that's what I wanted to say, the National Security Agency. They gave us a very healthy grant that was able to fund over 50 people going through the CMMC certified professional CCP training. And so it's really exciting. We're helping 50-ish, actually about 45 45 veterans, or those that are transitioning out of service, another like 12 or so active family members of active duty military as well, helping them to enter this ecosystem and build up the ecosystem. It's a really cool thing. It's actually going on now. I owe my students a lot of work. For any of them that watches, I haven't forgotten about you. I will get to you. But those are the 5 hats that I wear currently, other than being a dad and, a husband.
I was going to say,
yeah,
dad, husband, 2 kids. I mean, crazy. And a really good friend, by the way, as well. I got to put out there. Yeah, you teach for Phoenix TS. That was you mentioned that. So just for clarity, right? So you've along with all of that, you're also a prolific author. I mean, you've written a bunch of different books. I actually have one of the books you wrote while you were working with Future Feed. This thing, right, that was given away at Seek East, and I was able to grab a copy before they ran out. The CMMC Everything You Need to Know to Get Started Guide. That's a great title. And you also have a book on CUI that is out right now, and that the AB will be distributing as well. So we got to put that out there as well. What's it called?
I have 2 of them actually. One's called CUI Fundamentals, which is the basics for I always use the little machine shop down the street as the example, but for that little machine shop that just needs to know what to do to keep its nose clean, they don't need to know all the ins and outs of the program. And then I have another one called CUI Informed, which is more like a textbook. It has learning exercises and all sorts of stuff in it. And if you really need to do a deep dive into the CUI program, that covers a lot of the
CUI Informed.
CUI Informed.
Okay. All right. So we've established the fact that you're amazing. All right. So that's already established. We've also established the fact that CMMC is an ecosystem, a bunch of rules and regulations, a bunch of processes, and a bunch of players in an ecosystem that hopefully, when it's all said and done and everything is working well, will allow the Department of Defense to enforce a set of regulations that are already on the books, right? And just make sure that their contractors are secure in a certain way and have effectively secured their CUI, right? What is the elevator definition of CUI? Let's get into some serious information here, because we're going to get into some updates, some latest and greatest for everybody who already knows Jim, and who already knows that he's amazing and already knows all about CMMC. But before we really get into the valuable piece of, okay, let's get some latest and greatest information here, I would like to define CUI, because I think there's so many different definitions, right? But you've written a couple of books on this. I really believe you're one of the foremost authorities on this. How do you, if you're in an elevator, you're about to go from the first floor to the third floor, you got 2 floors and it goes quick, and somebody asks you, how do you define CUI? What would you say?
It's sensitive, and it's so sensitive that Congress or a federal agency took the time to write either a law or regulation that says that it has to be protected.
Sensitive information that has to be protected.
Period.
It's not classified. It's just sensitive. Why is it important if it's not classified?
Well, it's stuff like your personnel records. So you think about your social security number or your healthcare records or that kind of stuff. And especially when it starts to become aggregated. So it's one thing to be somebody like you who's awesome and the bad guys really do want your information. Another thing to be like me and a group of us where, it takes an aggregate where it's not one person whose information is valuable. It's because you have multiple people's information. So that aggregated information increases its sensitivity, and that makes it controlled and classified information. Basically, what happened was Congress looked at some type of information and said, "Ooh, you know what? This is sensitive enough that it needs to be protected." Again, like social security numbers, like your bank information, or your tax records when you give it to the IRS, or if you're running a business. Especially if you're a government contractor, when you give the government your proposal, how you expect to handle some problem, right? The government says, we've got a problem. They have an RFP, a request for proposals, and the proposal says, or the request says, we have some problem that we need you to solve. In your proposal, you propose your solution to the government. And so you're giving them sensitive information. You've invested some time to think about this problem. You've given them a proposed solution. The government can't just steal that. The government owes you a duty of confidentiality, and they only can use the one who actually wins the award. The other information that they get has to be kept confidential. And even the winner doesn't get to see what the other companies propose. So the government has all of these duties of confidentiality for all this different stuff. Most of it is the same kind of information that any commercial entity is going to handle. You've got your employees' social security numbers. You have actually healthcare information about a lot of your employees, more than likely. You have other very sensitive information. I worked for a company that had the source code for Microsoft Windows. Yes. Think about it. If we had a breach of the source code for Microsoft Windows, what that would have done. Now, it was a multi-billion-dollar company, but we would have gone out of business if we lost that, right? So knowing what you have and that you need to protect it, there are ways of handling this stuff. It doesn't rise to the level of directly impacting national security, but there's enough there that, boy, if we had a major breach like the OPM breach, it could have significant impacts on our economy or on our national security.
Cool. One of the things that that when we were on the board and our vision of this thing, and so much of it has come to pass, which is wonderful to see. It's really nice to see our baby grown up, right? But our vision, at least in my view, I thought, and I think we talked a lot about this as we were having conversations every day about where this thing is going to go. I thought about insurance companies, right? Insurance, I mean, what you're doing right now, I love it because that can really extend the reach of CMMC beyond the Department of Defense, right? So if an insurance company requires a company that may not have anything to do with the DoD to look, if you have CMMC, if you're CMMC certified, then you can get better insurance. That can quickly go beyond the Department of Defense, right? But let's stick to the federal government. Um, the FAR CUI rule, right? The FAR CUI rule. Sorry. That's a FAR. It's not a DFARS, right? CUI is a federal government wide, not just Department of Defense definition of CUI. But CMMC only is enforceable is a DoD thing, right? A DoD system. What are the chances that it's going to go beyond that?
I think they're very good. In fact, so I run the nonprofit. The nonprofit submitted comments on the FAR CUI rule saying you really need to do CMMC because the CMMC is about protecting CUI. The CUI program says that if you give information, if you give CUI to somebody else, you have to have a reasonable assurance that they will handle the information appropriately. That is, they will safeguard it, et cetera, appropriately. Okay. DoD learned really quickly through their studies that I talked about before and through a bunch of other stuff that DoD has learned. DoD learned really quickly that contractors can't be trusted. They will tell you that they are doing things. And in many cases, in the contractor's defense, there's a couple of them. Number one, 800-171 is really confusing, and you have to know that there's an 800-171A to go read those requirements. And so there's all these technical issues why the technical implementation piece doesn't get done. But then there's the practical side of things that if I'm a small business, I'm going to look at the contract with the government, and it's going to have hundreds of clauses, what are called incorporated by reference. So they're not written into the contract. It's just a number. And you're supposed to click and go find that number and then read the 15-page long clause that goes along with that for every one of the hundreds of clauses potentially that are in your contract. And you are promising the government that you're doing everything in every one of those. If you're the little machine shop down the street, again, you're busy making the widgets. You're doing the things that you are really good at. In many cases, the government or a prime contractor asked you to come help work on this project because you are so good at what you do. So you're going to assume the government's just going to be asking you for reasonable things, right? I mean, why would the government ask you to do anything crazy like put in place 110 cybersecurity controls? But the reality is that happens. So contractors don't always, when they sign and say, yes, I'm in compliance with this, they haven't always done the diligence that's necessary to really have signed that truthfully. DoD learned that lesson the hard way. And there is no reason that any other federal agency has any rational basis for expecting anything else from their contractors or anybody else that they give controlled and classified information to. So that's the crux of the argument that we made was, look, DoD's already learned this lesson. No other agency should have to learn this lesson. It's not good for us as a nation for other agencies to have to learn the same lesson over and over again. So just make CMMC part of the national requirement, or at least the federal government-wide requirement. And
the infrastructure, the ecosystem's already built out.
Right,
it's
exactly.
all there.
Yeah, don't recreate the wheel. Don't try to create a different flavor of CMMC for every agency. That's really stupid and really inefficient.
Well, so what is? I mean, the process could be pretty complex, right? But how long do you think if the stars align, how long do you think it would take for this to go government wide? I mean, it's just now starting finally with the DoD.
The beautiful thing of all the lessons that DoD has learned is that, like I said, we've gone through the rulemaking process already. So we kind of have a sense for the current CMMC regulation. They're also called rules. So the current CMMC regulation has some issues, as you would expect, because it's long, it's complex, and there's lots of issues that have to be dealt with. So the current one has some issues, but we're finding those now. We already have a basis for the new regulation. It's not like they're having to write it from scratch. That process alone can take a year to 2 years of just trying to author something. So we've got something that we could bring forward out of the DFARS and into the FAR, where now it applies to the entire executive branch. So I don't think that process necessarily has to take that long. It still will, but especially with this administration, the president is exerting a lot of control over the agencies. And so when that happens, it's a lot easier to push down something like this across all the agencies. In other administrations, typically, and what has happened historically, is that those agencies have a lot of autonomy and they are generally run themselves. So getting agencies to adopt this has been horrendous. The CUI program dates back to the 9/11 attacks. The first CUI memo came out in 2008. The actual CUI program itself, the 32 CFR 2002, the regulation that implements it, came out in 2016. We are almost a decade since that happened. We're almost on the 25th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, and we still aren't doing the things that Congress told the agencies they needed to do back in 2004. This is awful, right? So I do think that this administration is in a position to actually make this happen quickly, and to force the homogeneity, the similarity, the unified approach that the government really needs.
Katie, for federal CIO, is there such a thing? Federal CIO?
There is, yeah.
Let's do this, Katie. All right, so let's kind of come back to CMMC as it is today. When we were looking at this and building the ecosystem, it was CMMC 1.0, right? And it was a lot more complex, right? So it was like, okay, there were 5 levels, for example. Now there's 3 levels. And every organization was supposed to get assessed externally. Even level 1 organizations, that would be like tens of thousands of companies.
Oh, hundreds of
thousands of companies. Now we're talking only some level 2 and level 3 companies would be assessed, and by different organizations. And so CMMC level 1, CMMC version 1 and CMMC version 2 are very different, right? And things were simplified. I mean, I think there was a lot of complaints. It was maybe justified that things get simplified. Now we have new guidance out of the DoD that tends to scale things back even further. Can you explain how this new guidance is scaling things back even further, and why the DoD might be trying to simplify things even further?
So I think at the end of the day, for the why question, it's because they're fundamentally misunderstanding, ironically, their own program, but how it fits into the whole government. So DoD only has authority to regulate its own information, right? So if it pays a contractor to do things for it, it's fine. That's still the government's. It's still DoD's information. But when it's the Department of Homeland Security's information, or take your pick of other agency, DoD has no authority to regulate that information at all. So one of the things that my nonprofit has argued is that there are certain requirements in DFARS 7012, DFARS 252-204-7012, that say that if you're going to use a cloud service to store, process, or transmit CUI, that you must use what's called a FedRAMP authorized or equivalent environment. Now, FedRAMP authorized is this whole big process. You have to be a government contractor. You have to jump through all these hoops. It is a non-trivial thing. One of the companies that I worked for was starting down that road, and it was going to be a $250,000 investment. Most small businesses, most innovative businesses don't have the time, don't have the money to do that kind of thing. So you don't find a lot of the more innovative companies that have FedRAMP authorizations. The equivalency gives you a little more wiggle room, but as a practical matter, it's still a way more to jump through than most organizations deal with. What we pointed out was the way DoD wrote DFARS 7012, they were applying that specific requirement, the FedRAMP requirement, to all CUI, which is a problem because 32 CFR 2002, the CUI program, says that 800-171 is the way to protect government's information or CUI when it's not in federal systems. Sorry if that was really technical, but like that is the way that you do it, right? No, not FedRAMP, not anything else, 800-171. So we argued, we told DoD, hey, you got this fundamental problem in this regulation and it could come back to bite you. And so now what DoD is saying in their latest interpretation of when the CMMC assessment requirements kick in, and the third-party assessment requirements kick in, is it's only when it's a form of CUI that DoD controls. Well, so there's a big difference in the CMMC program. because CMMC is a validation that you have met all of the requirements. We're not adding new security requirements. Adding FedRAMP was you're adding new security requirements. That you can't do. But validating that you have implemented the same requirements or the necessary requirements, you're not adding a new security requirement. You're literally just validating. So I think DoD is misunderstanding where they stubbed their toe in the DFAR 7012. I think that now they're being overly gun shy and only applying this to the defense category of CUI and the kinds of information that they actually control, rather than to CUI writ large. So I do think that there's some room for them to actually come back and rescind those initial instructions. As a practical matter, it actually does make life a little bit easier for their contracting officers, because now we're focused on just a handful of categories of information that we have to worry about. The rest of it we can let go for now. It's not going to have as big of an impact on the procurement process. A lot of the little guys the construction guys who maybe or mow the lawn on a base, but they have the street map for the base that might be considered CUI. We don't have to worry about them for now. They can self-assess. Not that that's a non-trivial thing, but it's still easier than having to go pay for a third-party assessment. So there's some real advantages to what they've done from a practical perspective, but I don't know that long-term it is really in the country's best interest to be going the route that they're going now. But you asked, why, where, how did they get there? And I think that's how they got there and why they're taking that approach.
I mean, okay, so maybe you and I disagree in that regard, and maybe we do. It's a very complex matter, right? I do feel like reducing the number of companies that require external assessment right now is probably a good thing because of the scale of the thing, right? And there's just not a lot of assessors out there, not a lot of C3PAOs out there yet. And so for practical reasons, shrinking the program a little bit and the definition of CUI to just mean, okay, DoD CUI only. Also for matters of just in terms of training the contracting officers and allowing them to kind of be able to select what's CUI, what's not, and so forth. Legally speaking, maybe an easier foray into CMMC to begin with, right? Because we're just getting started. What am I missing?
So a couple things. Number one, things like the healthcare information and social security numbers of active duty service members aren't considered defense information. So therefore, the people that are handling that really sensitive stuff that, again, like I said, imagine you're on the front line dealing with something. Meanwhile, when you go back to base that evening, your family is calling you from home saying that their information has been stolen and your credit card's maxed out. And now the next morning you've got to get up and go back out and deal with the enemy again. No, that is not an acceptable solution for me. That we're prioritizing technology over the people that are out on the front lines, and I don't think that sends the right message. There are other categories of CUI that we're now leaving out as well that are also really sensitive. There are facilities plans that aren't DoD, but DoD is there, and there's all these other things that we're not going to hold to the same standard. So that's number one. Number two is that a lot of government contractors don't just work in that one type of CUI. They actually play in a bunch of different areas. Now the folks who play in a bunch of different areas are going to invest in creating more secure infrastructure, while the other folks who can get away with self-assessment might cut some corners here and there. And so from a competitiveness perspective, the folks who are actually doing a good job and doing everything that we want them to do and have also paid the money for an assessment, so let's not forget about the cost there, compared to the other folks who haven't done the assessment and maybe cutting corners, they're able to deliver at a lower cost. And now there's a whole bunch of inequities there. So no, we kind of need to treat all contractors fairly. I agree with you. There probably does need to be some kind of ramp up period, but DoD has been telling contractors since 2019 that this is coming. And they've been telling them pretty much the same story the whole time, which is 800.171 is the core. Back in CMMC 1.0, there were some additional 20 controls that DoD tried to impose on things, fine. But as a practical matter, even then, at its core, 800.171 was the set of requirements. So nothing has changed in 5 years. You've had more than enough time to go put all this stuff in place.
Interesting. Yeah, it's there's the practical versus the theoretical and versus the real world security issues, right? That concerns that we've had since before 9/11, right? And like I just self-certified Phoenix DS. I'm the officer that, like if I lied, I'm going to go to jail, right? So the self-certification does have its own, those ours is CMMC level 1 because we don't actually carry any CUI, but I think does carry some risk because,
Oh yeah.
I feel like once like one self-certifying organization gets caught and its officers go to jail, then things get real, right? And
So I thought that too. And then I was just at a conference in November. So we're for the record, we are recording this in March of 2025. I was at a conference in November. And it was a very large, I won't name the conference because I don't want to call out any of the people that were there, but it was a very large conference. There were over 10,000 people that were in attendance. There were like 400 or 500 companies that were exhibiting to show the government what they could do. I walked around the show floor. I spoke at part of it, and I walked around the show floor and talked to people. And of the like 400, I think I talked to about 150 people, companies. More than half didn't know how to spell CMMC. And then I actually hit one guy. I told him, look, you have really cool technology. I understood what it was because my background and everything. And we started talking. And then he turns to the guy in the booth next to him and says, so do I really need to do this? Or is this just him selling me something, selling him something?
wow.
And the guy in the booth next to him said, look, statistically speaking, the likelihood that the government is going to come after you is so low that it's not worth dealing with this.
That's a story right there. That's a tech tale right there.
Right. So right there for you, like as a level 1 company, right, there are hundreds of thousands of companies like you out there that are in the defense supply chain. That DoD's estimate is that there are at least 200,000 companies that are going to be at level 1, and they only have visibility into the prime contractors and one tier below them. There's a whole host of people that are below that they don't have any visibility into. So the number is probably significantly higher than 200,000. What is the likelihood that you are going to be found out by DoD unless something happens, unless the bad guys actually do get in and there's all sorts of alarm bells?
I'll be fine because we're fine. We have our controls set and we had it cleared and everything. But yeah,
but you're jumping through the right hoops. You're making the right investments, et cetera.
Well, I better because I'm one of the founders. That would be horrible, right?
I'd be giving you a lot of grief, that's for sure. Yeah, but just statistically speaking, a lot of companies are willing to roll the dice because they think that they're not going to get caught. And even if that's only 10% of the supply chain, when you have 200,000 companies, that's 20,000 companies that have that attitude. That's a lot. That's not acceptable.
I just had dinner a couple nights ago with someone who works at some company that was like, yeah, my boss doesn't know how to spell CMMC. And I keep telling him, you got to do it. You got to do it. It's like, we'll just wing it. It's happening. So, that's why CMMC has to exist, right? Because it is, the carrot showed up a long time ago, right? So this is the stick. This kind of brings us, you're the lawyer, right? So this kind of brings us to kind of a lot of kind of legal concerns, right? So especially in this environment, right? If we don't like something, we go and fight it legally in the courts. As soon as CMMC really hits the ground, it is hit the ground. I'm seeing it now. But it starts to get enforced, right? Are we going to see legal challenges? And if we do, what is the likelihood of CMMC surviving those legal challenges?
I'll give you my favorite legal answer of it depends. The likelihood
You're such a lawyer, man.
So the likelihood of it surviving will depend largely on which aspects of the how much of the regulation is actually involved versus just somebody doing something stupid. So if it's built into the regulation and the regulation is challenged in a significant way, I could see there being blowback beyond just what the courts would do. So Congress getting involved, people going back to Congress and saying, what the hell, they've had 5+ years to do this. How are they still missing something fundamental like this? Look, the courts, the first chance they got, the courts smacked them down. This is all crap. We got to get rid of it and start over. And I think there would be some ears in Congress who would be happy to hear that message and who would try to push for that change. So I'm not so sure that that's really I don't think that's the right approach for anyone to take, but I do think that there are issues in the regulations that need to be fixed. That's why we've submitted public comments, was to try to address those so DoD doesn't have that kind of problem. Assuming that those are fixed and that those are not the source of the issue, the rest of it comes down to two things. Number one is DoD internally adopting consistent interpretations of their requirements. So they don't, when DoD's team does its assessments of C3PAOs, or when it does assessments of government contractors, every assessment team is different. And I am an assessor. We just had the conversation earlier today that, I and my business partner, we may assess things slightly differently. That's all, like, in the noise, in the margins, that's to be expected. And that's there's no way to stop that, because people are people, and that's fine. But this is like fundamental changes in DoD's approach to things, and they just make it up. Where on the industry side, there are working groups that are trying to create standardized approaches and general consensus about the way things are going to be, because we want to make sure that, just like we were talking about before, how you have those two different companies, one that invests a lot, one that doesn't invest much. And we want to make sure that everybody's held to basically the same standards. Again, we're human. There's going to be some variances, et cetera. But basically, everybody has to make the same level of effort to be part of this program. And so if you don't have that, that's where I see this having fundamental problems. And again, potentially having issues where it actually does destroy the CMMC program. Other than those, most of the rest of it is actually pretty straightforward. There aren't that many bases that I've been able to come up with for why, for example, a bid protest might be filed because one company has a CMMC certification from one entity versus another, or something like that. If there's an internal whistleblower who says, "Oh my God, no, they lied," that's a whole different story. But big picture, I just don't see a lot of bases for CMMC becoming much of an issue, really. I may be wrong. There are a lot of really creative lawyers out there who are smarter than me, so it's entirely possible that somebody will come up with something. But in talking to some of my friends who are really paying attention to this, we've really been trying to figure out, and we've struggled with coming up with a good scenario where a legitimate, you can make a case out of just about anything, but a legitimate case could be made where a bid protest or something like that would be the base, where CMMC would be the basis for that bid protest.
Speaking of standardizations, I know the AB, that the AB is working on creating some standards for this. And so hopefully we're moving towards a place where we'll have standard operating procedures, right, for everyone involved in the ecosystem, so we won't hit those challenges. And the thing is maturing. It's going to continue maturing. The threat landscape is changing all the time, right? And so then the regulation needs to change. The standard itself is updating, right? They're working on an update as well on 800/171. All right, so that's the legal challenges. What about the administration itself? The administration is going through and trying to remove regulations wherever they can find them, right? Is CMMC also on the chopping block?
Not that we can tell. You never say never, right? But not that we can tell, because what we're seeing is, number one, as I said, the CMMC program started under President Trump. So it's very unlikely that the program would be thrown out across the board. Are there changes that might be made through the administration? Yeah, sure. The Biden administration made a bunch of changes when they came in. So it's every administration reserves the right to do that kind of stuff. That's not a big surprise. We are, again, it's March. We're only 2 months into this administration's second term. And so it's still too early to know for sure, but all signs are, especially with Katie Arrington getting the position that she's in, which is actually a bigger position than she was in before. when she helped create CMMC, I don't see this going away. Again, I can see where, in fact, this gets spread out to the rest of the government instead.
Yeah, I feel like I think these are questions that every DoD contractor owner is asking. It's like, will CMMC go away? Like, I really hope it goes away. No, but that's not the ones who are really responsible, or the ones who don't want to spend the money on security. A lot of them are like you just said. I mean, burying their heads in the sand. Many, I can't. You and I both, right? I speak to a lot of business owners who just like, is this real? I don't really know. I've been avoiding it. They've been avoiding it like it's fake news or something. So, but it's honestly, I'm here to tell you, it's not fake news. It's here, and you heard it from the source, James Goepel himself. It's here. How about specific bidders? Like, I mean, let's now see in terms of legal issues, because you're my lawyer of choice here, who knows so much about CMMC. So legal issues in the process itself. For example, let's say two bids come in, the RFP process, it's an acquisition rule, right? So, contracting officers are involved, and, now all of a sudden one organization is picked versus another, but then there's CMMC. There might be just so many different issues now are going to pop up that weren't there before, right? So do you see a prevalence, at least at the beginning, when CMMC is still kind of in a gray area, of bid protests coming in, and what would be their nature?
Yeah, it's tough to see. I was talking to Eric Crucius, one of the lawyers that you and I both know, about that specific topic.
I'd love to have him on the show to see if he agrees with you on a lot of. He'd be the other lawyer, right? Yeah,
absolutely. So Eric and I had a conversation. We were at a conference together earlier this week, and we were talking about that specific issue, like, where do you see the bid protests? And it's more from a functional perspective. Did the contracting officer really recognize and work with the right teams to identify whether there's CUI that's going to be implicated in this or not? Under the new FAR CUI rule, and even under DoD's programs, they are supposed to identify the CUI in advance, and they're supposed to mark it appropriately. They're supposed to actually give you either under the FAR CUI rule a standard form that will eventually come out, or DoD has what's called a security classification guide, and that SCG is supposed to tell you what aspects of the information are CUI. And so if they don't give you that information, there might be like all those mechanical things that are supposed to happen on the back end. Even if the wrong person at DoD designated the information, that is determined that the information is CUI, there's a whole bunch of bases for bid protests on that on the DoD side, the stupid stuff that everybody's going to stub their toe on. And there's a lot of education that needs to happen on DoD side to stop that from happening. But other than that, there really just aren't a lot of bases. Once you have a CMMC certification, the only thing that I could see is if a C3PAO was found to be offering really low prices for their assessments, and because eventually there was a whistleblower, it was found that they had colluded with, and there's all these other things. And so basically you're invalidating the CMMC certifications that C3PAO put out. There may be, if there was an award to a contractor who had a certification from that kind of C3PAO, yeah, I could see where that would be the basis of some kind of bid protest. Or again, if there's a whistleblower who comes forward, especially right around the time of award, and now one of the competitors says, whoa, you got this potential claim pending, you got issues. Those kinds of things I could see happening. But again, you almost don't need CMMC for a lot of those things. So, yeah, I don't know. It moves the needle a whole lot.
So it's basically contracting officer making mistakes. Okay, it happens every day. Or some legal action happening against a winner. That happens every day, right? Now, again, CMMC would just kind of increase the possibilities of that happening on the security side of things. Okay, so for example, I know while I was on the board, I worked extensively with DAU, which is the Defense Acquisition University, and they were very much on top of trying to train, or at least working to, at that time, to build a program to train the contracting officer. I don't know what's happening there now, but I believe they are being trained, and they're out there and they're doing their work. And hopefully, again, it's an issue of there's just a lot. There's just DoD is huge, right? And so there's just a lot of people, their own standard operating procedures, their own kind of standard purchasing mechanisms, and standard ways of defining CUI, right? And that can become very complex. And so it is a challenge. I mean, I wouldn't want to be,
at the conference this week, I made the analogy that we're not just turning like a single aircraft carrier, which doesn't turn on a dime to begin with. We're talking about an entire fleet of aircraft carriers trying to turn and pivot, right? You've got that many people. You have 4 million people who have to be trained. So that part, I completely agree. That kind of culture change. I was talking to somebody a couple of weeks ago at another conference who is involved in purchasing for a large base. Again, won't give geographies or anything like that. I have books. I give away copies of my CUI fundamentals book at conferences. And I tried to give her a copy at first, and she said, "Oh no, I understand CUI. That's just FOUO or SBU." And I said, "No, it's actually like completely redoes the way that kind of information is supposed to be handled." She's like, "Yeah, but I know how to do all that stuff." I said, "Oh, okay, so you understand." And I gave her like one simple example, and she said, "Wait, what?" So that's what we're dealing with across the board.
Had been through the training?
No, probably. It is required, but like a lot of people, you put that same thing. I've heard this stuff dozens of times before, not realizing that it's changed. Right? Heard this stuff dozens of times before. I'm just going to hit play in the background while I go do the other work that I need to do, or while I'm washing dishes at night or whatever it is. I'm going to let that play, and now I've met my requirements, and I just go on. So I don't know that it was actually internalized in any meaningful way. I also do think that DAU has some room for improvement in their training programs. Some of what they teach is inconsistent with the requirements in 32 CFR 2002. They tend to teach it from a very DoD-centric perspective, which is not correct under this particular program. The whole point is standardization throughout the government, and they keep applying interpretations of the rules and regulations that are, again, inconsistent with the language that's there and the spirit and intent of the regulations. So,
I mean, again, it is a DoD-centric thing, right? And it hopefully will evolve.
Well, but this is about the CUI program. CMMC, there's a whole bunch of training that has to happen there too, and that I agree. That one is DoD-centric and does need to evolve. Completely agree. But when it comes to CUI, which is the core of everything that we're really talking about here, there's, again, the training really misses the mark.
Inconsistent. Okay. There's also a lot happening on, I think, okay, so I am, for example, representing a company that is level 1, right? And we've actually been working to make sure we've been testing, we've been working on these, very few controls, 17, 18 controls, and making sure that they're working effectively and that we're doing our job, at least in that regard. And we're also a prime. We're not dealing with another prime. We're a prime. We're just a very small prime, and all we do is training, right? So it's a different story at Phoenix DS. But many small businesses who may or may not be in their own understanding a level 1 business work with primes that are really enforcing, maybe they're kind of enforcing maybe higher standards, or that's happening, or just pushing kind of a blanket requirement to their entire supply chain. So let's say Lockheed is a prime, right? And they're just pushing to all of their subs a certain set of requirements that may or may not apply. What are some of the complications there that are happening?
Right. And doing it for the right reasons from a legal perspective. Fundamentally, it goes back to the proper training on CUI. So the government does a horrible job of identifying CUI before they send it out. They do a horrible job of telling you, hey, when you create this, it's going to be CUI, and here's how you mark it. So the prime contractors know this. The prime contractors don't know half the time if the government's going to change its mind and something that wasn't CUI now is, or vice versa. So they're doing a CYA. There's the requirement in DFAR 7012 that if your subcontractor is going to handle CUI, then you have to include the 7012 requirements. That is, they have to get CMMC certified. They jump through all the right hoops, not just in 7012, but They have to jump through all the right hoops themselves. And the primes have said, well, since we don't know whether you're going to handle CUI or not, we don't know what it is. We don't know what it looks like and smells like. So we're just going to make everybody have to jump through all the hoops to at least implement the requirements for handling CUI. Now, whether you need a CMMC certification or not, especially in light of the recent guidance from the DoD PMO's office, that's a separate issue, or acquisition and sustainment, whoever it was that issued the requirements. That's different. But fundamentally, the primes are doing a cover their rear end approach and just pushing the requirements down to everybody. And they're requiring it not 2 years from now or 3 years from now when some of the requirements kick in, but they're requiring it as soon as possible, because in the 32 CFR 170, which is the CMMC program rule, DoD reserves the right to require CMMC certifications on day one for certain contracts. So the primes are like, well, even though we can self-certify for a year and there's some other wiggle room here and there, the primes are like, yeah, we just don't want to take any chances. So we're going to push ourselves to get certified and ready, and we're going to push everybody in our supply chain to get certified and ready too.
And certified and ready at level 2.
Yep.
And certified by a C3PAO, even though some level 2s aren't necessarily they don't necessarily need that per guidance, but the primes are requiring it of their supply chain.
Either requiring it directly or basically saying, look, we've got you and a competitor. One of you is going to participate on this contract, and we're going to trust the people that have the certification. So, you kind of don't have a choice.
So if you want to be a sub, and you're mowing the lawn, you better be level 2 certified for most of these organizations.
For a lot of this stuff, yeah, even though there's a good chance that you will never handle CUI in that scenario of mowing the lawn, right?
What's the solution there? The government defining the CUI better? Well, again, I'm hoping this is on its way, right? I mean, this is an evolution, right? We're just getting started. I'm being positive here. I think everybody's working really hard. I like to think that, most people, both in the government and in the private sector, have the best interest of the country at heart. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a simpleton. But I feel like this clarity will come through experience, which is going to mean chaos for a bit. I get that. And overspending, right? So that's really what we're talking about. Overdoing, over security. And maybe that's not such a bad thing, but it's also really hard on these smaller businesses. So there's going to have to be some correction. In terms of the guidance, okay, final question. In terms of the guidance, when is the rubber hitting the road here? If I'm a level 1 self-certifying, when do I must be self-certified? And then if I'm certifying level 2, or when do I need to be certified to be able to do contracts at this point? What are the dates?
So that's a question. It comes down to whether or when a particular regulation is passed. The scuttlebutt right now is June. So that regulation is expected to at least be published and final, but maybe not effective as of June. What my back of the envelope math is next fiscal year, so September of 2025, you will start to see requirements for self-certification at either level 1 or level 2 showing up in government contracts or DoD contracts, again, starting in basically 6 months from now. A year from then, so roughly the next fiscal year 2027, you're going to start to see CMMC certification requirements show up in contracts as well. And just to double back for a second we talked about how these are defense forms of CUI that are implicated. That's naval nuclear propulsion information. Not a lot of companies handle that stuff as a practical matter. However, there are things like defense critical infrastructure information, the maps for a base, the layouts of the plumbing, the electrical, all of that kind of stuff. All the construction companies that are in there, they're probably going to need to be CMMC level 2. We're also talking about the covered defense information or control technical information, things that have a military or space application. Those are things that are going to need to be CMMC level 2 certified. So everybody that's making bombs, bullets, cool tech, all that kind of stuff, they're going to need to be CMMC certified. by that, you're going to start seeing that come up in your contracts by 2027. So you're running out of time. 2028, we pretty much will have almost everything rolled out by then. It is a longer rollout than that, but as a practical matter, we're pretty much going to be seeing everything in place by then.
Running out of time. That's a great place to end. Because we ran out of time. I wanted this to be 45 minutes, and it's like an hour and 18 already. But you're just so knowledgeable. I love talking to you.
And I
got
talked
so
a
much
lot,
out of this. Thank you so much. James Goepel, everyone. My first guest. I love it. I had a blast. I hope you had a good time. And I hope you, the audience, learned a lot today, both about CMMC and also about Jim, and enjoyed the tales of his experiences. So this is Ben Tchoubineh signing off the first episode of Tech Tales with Ben Tchoubineh. Thank you, Jim. Thank you so much for the time you spent with me today. I know you had a very, very busy day, and you just kind of carved out the time to do this. Thank you. You got to go. I will see you later. Thank you. Later.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
That's a wrap on today's episode of Tech Tales with Ben Tchoubineh. We hope you enjoyed the stories and insights from some of the brightest minds in the tech industry. Make sure to like and subscribe, leave a review, and join us for more inspiring tales from the world of technology. Stay curious, stay connected, and as always, thanks for tuning in. This is Ben Tchoubineh, signing off. See you next time.